Okay, now let's make this form functional. And to make this form functional, let's head back to our application. So this is part of our nav component. So I'll close down the app component stuff right now. And we're going to be working inside here because this is where our form is located. Now we need a property, a class property, to store the values of these two inputs when a user's typing into them. Currently, Angular doesn't know anything about these as we're typing into these inputs, and we need to tell Angular about that information. So inside our nav component, just as a thing to store the two properties in, I'm just going to say model and give it a type of any and just give it an initial value of an empty object. And then I'm going to create a method called login. And all I'm going to do is just console.log what is inside this .model. Now we're going to be using Angular template forms for this first example. There are two different approaches to forms in Angular. We have template forms where all of the hard work is driven by the template. And we also have something called reactive forms where all of our logic about our form is contained inside the component. But Angular forms are considered more simple. And that's the type of form that we're going to create at this early stage. We will look at reactive forms a bit later on. So because all of the hard work is done inside the template, that's where we write the code. And the first thing we need to do is give our form a template reference variable. And we do that by using the hash. And we can give our form a name, and I'm going to call it login form. But then we need to set this to be a type of ng form. And if we take a look at the error, then it's the standard thing. No directive found with export as ng form. And when we see this, it's because we're using a standalone component. And we do need to provide the form functionality to this component, which means adding something to the imports array. And in order to use forms in an Angular component, we need to use the forms module that we get from Angular Forms. So do ensure this is imported and added to your imports. And now we've got all of the form functionality we need that we can use inside the template. So the error's gone away. We're also going to give this a submit function. And to do that, we open parentheses and we can say ng submit, and then we can execute our login method. And something else I'm going to do, you may want to do this, you may not, but I'm going to turn off autocomplete for these inputs, as I'll just find it slightly annoying as I'm demonstrating. So we need to tell Angular about these inputs, and there's two things we need to do here. First of all, we need to give our inputs a name. And I'm going to set the name for this one to be username. And then we need to use ngModel. And this is slightly awkward to type, but we need square brackets, then parentheses, and then ngModel. And we shouldn't need to import anything from this or for this, and I can say this is model.username. And that should work without errors. And let's just move some of this down so I don't go too far off the right of the screen. Okay, so these are the things we need. We need to give our input a name. And Angular needs this to track the name bound to the directive. And then we use ngModel. And this is Angular's two-way binding in action. When we use square brackets and parentheses and ngModel, then this is two-way binding. I can receive data from the component, and I can also send data to the component from the template. And it's the two-way binding. And we also need to do the same for the other input here as well. So I'll just bring some of this stuff down. And for this one as well, we'll give it a name equal to password, and we'll give it the ngModel. So square brackets, parentheses, ngModel equals, and we'll say model.password. Now Angular is going to be tracking this input, and because this model we have inside our component here, and we're logging this.model out to our console, if I go back to the component, and I'll just refresh the page, make sure everything is still fine, but then I type into this form and click login, what we see in our console is the output of those inputs. And because it's using the submit function of a button, I also could just type in the username and password and just press return. And again, that submits the form. And we get that functionality because inside our button here, we've got the type of submit, which means we can either click this button to call the function to log in, or we can just press the enter key and that does the same thing. So Angular Forms, it is as simple as that. Just two things to add to our inputs, the ng model and the name of the inputs. Give the form an ng submit function and tell the form it's a type of ng form, and boom, we have form functionality, and we can see that we've got the outputs of what the user has entered into those inputs. So that was nice and easy. And what we're going to take a look at next is another important feature of Angular, and that's the concept of services and Angular services, and we'll take a look at that next.